I congratulate you all on this 30th anniversary, and I want to talk to you today about the media and Christian perspectives. I want to define the media in a way that I think we will have a better understanding of what the media is all about. I want to give you an overview, looking at the past and the present. Then I want us to consider the media and Christian perspectives. And your theme is all grace for all sufficiency. So I want to present to you a few people who are graced for sufficiency. And then I'm going to end by borrowing a leaf from Honorable Patrick Obiahon. We're going to look at the crinkles, the crankles, and the ziggy-zaggers. Praise the Lord. Okay. So the media, two short definitions. Collins Dictionary says, it is the means of communication that reaches large numbers of people, such as TV, newspapers, and radio. Wikipedia says, one of the means or channels of general communication, information, or entertainment in society as newspapers, radio, or television. It seems to me that both of them should update their definitions, because what we don't have there is the internet. And the internet is all over the place these days. But three key words there, which you can see in red: communication, channels, and information. So let's take communication first. Communication is the transfer of information, ideas, or feelings from one person or sender to another in such a way that it is understandable enough by the receiver to elicit feedback. So if I send you information and I don't get feedback, it is because you have either not understood what I said or because you chose not to understand what I said. And actually, the choice is yours. The information or message could be conveyed via several channels, including writing, speaking, signaling, or some other technical medium. So you can see that this particular definition is a little bit more modern and up-to-date because it recognizes technical mediums. Okay, so let's look at channels. A channel is a passageway, a means of access for a thing, a communication, or an idea. Think of a channel as a sort of tunnel or funnel that moves something directly through. A passage, or a tube, if you like, through which something flows. And isn't it interesting that in those days anyway, we used to call the TV the tube. It's called many different things now. And then a channel is a band of frequencies used in radio and television transmission, especially as used by a particular station. There is a responsibility that goes with those band of frequencies. But how many of them actually are responsible in their usage? But we'll come to that. Okay, let's look at information. Now, information can be described as knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction. If you want to know something, you investigate, you read, you study, you ask questions, you're instructed. But then you also get information from intelligence. I'm sure these days, when everybody's always talking about security, they talk about intelligence within the community, all right? So people are expected to share information they get, especially when you see strange faces. And then, of course, there's news. Then we go to facts, figures, and data. All these make up what we call information. I'm still defining the media here, because we're going to have a different definition later on. So let's look at the traditional sources of information. Of course, you want to read something, you want to get some information, get some knowledge, you open a book. Naturally, there's the internet. We all have access to that. There are magazines, there are journals, there are newspapers, and the broadcast media. So, in a nutshell, we've looked at the media in terms of communication, channels, and information. And it's very important for us to remember those three words, because when we talk about them later, we're going to talk about them using a different lens. So now I thought it was important for us to look at our past and our present circumstances. And when I say our, I mean those of us who are in the media. I asked myself this question: what has been the prevailing atmosphere in which the media has operated over the years? When you meet a press man or woman, when somebody comes to you and says they would like to interview you or they would like to have a discussion with you, are you just seeing that person? Are you just seeing that man, or you're just seeing that woman? Or is there a history that goes behind that man or that woman? And I want to say that we began with the colonial era. In those days, journalists were denied access to places and persons for information. You need to find out information. You want to get the right story, but no way for you. Then, when government was displeased, and government were the big spenders in those days, they would withhold their patronage. They would refuse to give you government advertisements. Now, how would you run your newspaper? How would you run your establishment or your magazine then and now without advertisements, without money coming in? How do you run that organization? And then the other thing that happened in the colonial era was that official documents containing valuable information were labeled in a dubious manner. So, okay, you want information? There's the file. Read it. You look at the file. It has a strange label. It has a strange name, which really has nothing to do with what you are trying to find out for your story, for your paper. So if the label is dubious, how would you describe the information that is inside it? Definitely there's no way that it can be right. So if you think that fake news, that fake news started yesterday with the internet, you're wrong. Fake news began in the colonial era when they would label files in dubious manners. Okay, let's move to the military era. Now here we had Decree number 4 of 1984. So press reports were criminalized and proscribed, and written statements were prescribed. That is, if you expose the military to ridicule of any kind. But it wasn't just that. There was a pervasive atmosphere of menace that was in the air. And sometimes it went beyond the ridiculous and became the sublime. Because I remember one day I was in the newsroom and I was part of the editorial team that day. Somebody who was a minister, a member of the Supreme Military Council in those days, came into the newsroom with his aide. And I was looking at this man and thinking to myself, what is he looking for here? After all, he has an aide. Somebody can assist him. Do you know that he had a press release in his hand? and he put it on my desk. And he said, Bimbo, I'm traveling tomorrow. Please put it in the news. Well, I am pretty well brought up. So what I wanted to say, I did not say. But I can tell you that it was one of those incidents that made me begin to think about leaving the NTA as early as I did. Because I asked myself, so is this what I've come here to do? To tell the world that a minister is traveling? Anyway. Then, again, under the military era, we had the Offensive Publications Proscription Decree 35 of 1993. And this made it possible for the government to clamp down on media houses across the nation. In fact, in July of 1993, in one single day, 17 newspaper houses and magazines and a broadcasting station, all of them were closed in one day. So this is what is behind the man or woman who is coming to interview you. It's not only that. Arbitrary arrests and detentions, extrajudicial killings, corruption, excessive use of force, etc., etc. All these were things that members of the press were faced with. Do you think it improved in the civilian era? Is it really that much better now? Well, let's see. In 1 year, between 1990 and 1991, no less than 10 CEOs of state-owned broadcast stations were sacked. And you can, believe it or not, most of them were sacked on air. They heard that they had lost their jobs by their colleagues reading it out on radio or on TV. We are broadcasting. Abi? Good. The media was still prey to being bought over. In fact, a professor, one Professor Luke Uche, he said that the government co-opted journalists to ensure that they were reduced to being mere stooges. In other words, they would select those journalists who were vocal and say, we have a job for you. We have a position for you. And of course, he who pays the piper, thank you very much. But then, when things began to get too bad, NGOs began to spring up here and there. NGOs like Media Rights Agenda, Civil Liberty Organization, etc. And then the other thing about the civilian era is that the NBC, that's the National Broadcasting Commission, was empowered to revoke licenses of stations which did not operate in accordance with the code and in the public interest. But we do have to ask one or two questions. What exactly is the public interest? If you are supposed to be told the truth, if you are supposed to be given the right information, and that information is not, shall I say, government friendly, then what happens? Whose interest are you protecting when you don't tell the truth? Well, that brings me to the current situation. People really are not too sure of what they're supposed to be doing. We have got some hardcore, die-hard professionals. They know what they are to do. They have been properly trained. They've come up in the system. They've come up in the industry. But we have a lot of young people who, I can describe them as Turks, if you like. A lot of young people who have not been trained. And when you have a situation where you have poor institutional support, and you have poor wages, and the welfare is not good, you can begin to understand why it is that this calamity of standards exists. Well, the truth is that we have some people who have quite a lot of money, they establish media organizations, newspapers, radio stations, TV stations, and many of them don't pay wages. There are some media houses who, in the last 6 months, sometimes more, they've actually not received their salaries. And their management say things like, if they are not finding a way to exist within this organization, why do they keep coming to work? But is that fair? Is it good for you to establish an organization and deliberately starve your staff of funds? So when people talk about brown envelopes, white envelopes, whatever color you want to call them, envelopes, sometimes the people who have turned up for that assignment were literally spending the last kobo that they had on them. And the interesting thing, or the ironical thing about it, is that you see members of the press, you recognize faces, you recognize voices. You see them and you imagine that because they are everywhere, that it means that their pockets are overflowing. So they're always under constant pressure from society. Society always assumes that they have more than enough and therefore they should share. This is part of the current situation. And limiting policies. Limiting policies is another one. Federal character has been around for several years. But you see, I ask myself a question. What has federal character got to do with somebody who can't speak well? Somebody who will say sicken and sips instead of chicken and chips. You will tell me it's federal character that you must employ somebody from that part of the country. What happens to professionalism? What happens to standards? What happens to the people who are watching and trying to learn from those that they are watching on TV or listening to? So the policies are limiting. And naturally, what you're going to get is a compromised output. And that is what we do get many a time. All right, talking about limiting policies, let me just say that sometime in September last year, The Guardian came out with this screaming headline that the Information Ministry and others rank low on compliance with the FOI Act. That's the Freedom of Information Act. Well, apparently, several NGOs got together to rank the accessibility or the availability of information. And it was revealed that out of the 213 agencies that they assessed, 16 people or 16 organizations tied in the 185th position. So here we are. Poor standards, lack of institutional support, lack of training, poor wages, etc., etc. And we are faced with three very, very stark realities. It's important for me to lay this groundwork because it is within this situation that those journalists who are Christians have to operate. So you need to understand how they're operating, why they're operating, and what they're doing. Okay. So we have the first stark reality. It is a crisis of perspective. You are looking at this glass. The people on this side believe that this glass is half empty. And the people on this side believe that the glass is half full. So when you report, you are definitely going to report through that perspective, that I think we are halfway there. Oh no, I think we still have halfway to go. Maybe both statements are correct, but you can see that the perspectives are different. Now, this crisis is despite this statement by Joseph Pulitzer. I'm sure you're all aware of the Pulitzer Prize for journalism. Joseph Pulitzer says that you put it to them briefly, so they will read it, clearly, so they will appreciate it, picturesquely, so they will remember it, and above all, accurately, so they will be guided by its light. So for him, information is light. Briefly, assuming you're an editor and you have a report, for you it's a 15-second standard piece. But the owner of your organization says to you, I want you to turn this into a special report. So if it's a special report in the newspapers, it could very well be a center spread. If it's for radio or TV, it could be a 3-minute report. But Pulitzer said, put it to them briefly so they will read it. So, Mr. Editor, Madam Editor, you have a problem. Clearly, so they will appreciate it. And the owner has said to you, write this story from this angle. It's not write this story from the real angle. Let us see pictures that are humane, not pictures that are gory, not pictures that are full of sensationalism. Accurately, so they will be guided by its light. So that is our first crisis of perspective. Then we have the crisis of best practice. This is the stark reality too. Most journalists are walking on a tightrope. That is, if you're a journalist of conscience, you're walking on a tightrope. You want to please your employer. You want to be professional. You want to satisfy your conscience. You don't want to let down your profession. You don't want to disgrace yourself. You want to please your colleagues. So there's a crisis of best practice. And this is in a situation where Henry Anatole Grunwald, who used to be the editor of Time magazine, he says that journalism can never be silent. That is its greatest virtue and its greatest fault. He says it must speak immediately while the echoes of wonder, the claims of triumph, and the signs of horror are still in the air. In other words, as the news breaks, the public is entitled to receive it. They are entitled to that information. But here we are with a media owner again who says, that story, you may not have a choice than to hold on to that story. Well, in truth, you do have a choice. You could resign, but at the same time, you might be thinking about your family. You might be thinking about school fees. You might be thinking about house rent. You might be thinking about putting food on the table. So when he says, jump, you may be in a situation where you have to say, how high? All right, The next stark reality is the crisis of conscience. So you, a member of the media, there is a problem on ground. Your back is against the wall. You are hoping that you will be able to turn the minds of the public towards that problem, towards that issue. But look at your own position. You are in the middle. Why couldn't you have been in the forefront talking about that issue and then trying to persuade the public to also look at that issue and then zoning in on that issue? Here you are, right in the middle of a crisis of conscience. And yet, Catherine Graham, who was the owner and chief editor of the Washington Post at the time when the Watergate scandal broke, she said, the power is to set the agenda. What we print, I added broadcast or post, and what we don't print, broadcast or post, matters a lot. It is your conscience that will tell you what to print. It is your conscience that will tell you what to broadcast. And we, the members of the media, we are the ones who are supposed to set the agenda. Who are we? We are editors. We are talk show hosts. We are reporters. We are news anchors. We are producers, columnists, correspondents, writers, publishers, media owners. We are the people who are supposed to set the agenda. But there is a million naira question. Can the professional still be a professional? Is it possible for the professional to operate professionally in this system, in this situation in which we find ourselves? Is it possible to be like a Cyril Stober? Now, there's an argument ongoing. I read it once in a while. I read various comments on social media. Some say, what is he still doing there? He has been there for over 30-something years. Shouldn't he go and sit down at home? But it is this same Cyril Stober that has been doing ordinary things in an extraordinary way. He's always striving to do better. He's always teaching and training those that are coming up behind him. For those who care to listen, because you know that sometimes when you are well known, when you are recognized, you are no longer teachable. Can you be a Cyril Stober who has a prevailing attitude of excellence? Can you be intentional about upholding the tenets of journalism? Because you see, if he decides that he no longer is interested, if he decides that because he retired, they brought him back on contract. I think they brought him back again on contract. I'm actually not sure if he's still reading the news or not, but he's there and he's taking a keen interest in what the younger ones are doing. Now, if he decides to bow out completely and maybe become a farmer, what will happen to those people who still need to be trained, who still need to be taught? Well, Price Pritchett, who is a change agent exponent, he's an expert in change management, an author, a speaker. He says, live according to the ethics of excellence, and you can always stand proud. Okay. Live according to the ethics of excellence, and you can always stand proud. Is there something to be said for a name? Is there something to be said for a reputation? Is there something to be said for a legacy? Well, these are questions that I throw out to you. But then I have another question, and it's $1 million question. Can the professional be a Christian? Why don't you ask Tyler Perry? Tyler Perry is an American billionaire, writer, producer, actor, director. He has a huge setup in Atlanta where films are made. Why don't you ask Steve Harvey? I'm sure these names are not new to you. Good. Why don't you ask Steve Harvey? I don't think he's a billionaire, but I'm sure he's a millionaire. Neither of them ever get up onto a stage without acknowledging that if it were not for Christ, they would not be where they are today. And maybe we don't have to go too far away, because our own Banky Wellington is in the same category. He's a very well-known musician. Now he's into politics, but he is also a very, very staunch Christian. So can the professional be a Christian? Well, let's see if it's possible. Let's see if we can take it a step further. Stephen Covey says, you can want to do the right thing, and you can even want to do it for the right reasons. But if you don't apply the right principles, you can still hit a wall. Principles. Okay. We're beginning to come to the area of kingdom principles. Can we go back to the beginning and look at the media from a slightly different perspective? Let's give it a Christian definition for a change. Instead of just media as we hear it, media as we understand it, let's give it a different meaning. It is a means of ethically directing information accurately. That is my new definition for the media. A Christian definition, a means of ethically directing information accurately. And that accurately is very, very important. It is still the transfer of information, ideas, or feelings from one person or sender to another, but in such an ethical and excellent way that it is understandable enough by the receiver to elicit constructive feedback. The information or message could be conveyed via several appropriate channels, including writing, speaking, signaling, or some other technical medium. So, if the communication is supposed to be delivered through radio, then it is prepared as a radio communication. You know, when musical programs on TV became popular, I always described them in a particular way. I said, what has happened is that you have put a DJ in front of a camera. It is not a program that has any kind of depth or value. In as much as music is great, and music sometimes has good messages, in terms of production, all you have done is to say, you, presenter, stand in front of the camera and then roll music. That is not a musical program. That could work for radio, but it will not work for TV. So we are looking at ethical and excellent ways of communication. Now let's look at the next word, channel. The Christian journalist is the channel or passageway that accesses communication or ideas. So, it's not enough to just simply look for information. This information has to be sought in a particular way. He or she is the tunnel or funnel that does not move information directly through without it being sieved. So it is not garbage in and garbage out. That's not possible. If you are a Christian journalist, you will make sure that the information that you get is thoroughly sieved and thoroughly verified. It's not just that you're checking to make sure that the sources are correct, the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. You have to verify that information. So if you are the Christian journalist and you are the tube through which something is flowing, that something that is flowing must be sieved and verified information. Again, if you are the Christian journalist, you must sanitize and regularize radio and TV transmission for use by particular channels and stations. So if you know that a program, for instance, is not for children below the age of 10, you will ensure that it is broadcast at a time that children below the age of 10 should be watching. So adult programs should be broadcast at the time when normally, I will say that in quotes, because sometimes we don't even know how to tell our children that it's time to go to bed. So certain programs should not be made available to them at certain times. It is for the Christian journalist to ensure that that rule is kept. Now, information. Information has to be wholesome information. It's not just any kind of information that we're going to work with. Knowledge obtained from investigation, study, or instruction needs to be checked and verified. Intelligence and news. It's very, very important. Maybe we should go right back to the beginning of what news is actually supposed to be. It was described as notable events, weather, and sports. That is actually the acronym for news. Okay? So if you are reporting, you should make sure that it is really a notable event and not just a sensational event. And of course, information also includes facts, figures, and data correctly analyzed. You know, TV and radio have given us so many people who have become experts. We are not sure sometimes when they analyze different facts if we're getting the correct information. But if you are the Christian journalist, you will make sure that the person you are inviting as an expert actually is an expert. Okay, next slide, please. Holistic sources of information. All right. Initially, we talked about books, internet, journals, magazines, newspapers, broadcast media. But we must add policies and laws, credible people, statistics, and data. So the information is not narrow. It's spread as widely as possible. And we're giving every angle that we possibly can to it, because it's our job to make sure that it's fair and balanced. All right, next slide. So the Christian journalist knows the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. He knows that his or her activities are directed to secure the inner perfection of their own personality. That their behavior is derived from commitments to biblical principles. And that they know that it is beyond being law-abiding, but more to do with the moral path and doing the right thing. That is what the Christian journalist should be considering. Okay. We are advised by St. Paul that whatsoever things are true, honest, just, pure, etc., etc. Yes, that is so. There is a way that we will present these things. We will not glamorize war. We will not make it seem as if there's something to be gained from war. We will not make it seem as if people who are being smuggled across borders, we will not make it seem as if there is something to be celebrated. It is for us to apply that Christian lens and those principles, because we're trying to ensure that we make people think of pure things. We make people think of virtuous things. We're trying to give people solutions, not add fire to the problem. Okay, thank you. After all, Barack Obama, he said that it's important to make sure that we're talking to each other in a way that heals, not in a way that wounds. So, for me, that is what the Christian journalist should be doing. Thank you. There must be a realistic balance between ethics and Christian principles and excellence and professionalism. So it is possible for the journalist to be a Christian and for the Christian to be a journalist. The choice actually is ours. You see, the communication that you put out there is entirely up to you. How you write it, what you say, how you present it, it is really up to you. And if you get to a point where you are being teleguided to do things in a particular way and you object, you walk out. You have to walk out. You have to turn your back on it. And have the faith that he will supply all of your needs according to. Okay. Next. So where are the role models? Where are the people who have achieved visible success, who have enhanced reputations, and who are graced for sufficiency in the eye of the storm? Because a Christian journalist is in the eye of the storm. And I have about 4 or 5 people that I want to present to you. These are people who have the talents, who decided not to bury those talents. Lekon Otufodunrin is one of them. He has over 30 years experience as a journalist in Nigeria. He's worked for Punch newspaper as an editor, online editor, Nation newspapers, and now he's executive director, Media Career Development Network, and is the founder of Journalists for Christ. Journalists for Christ promotes Christian ethics in the media, promotes activities of Christian organizations, engages and identifies with programs and ventures that can engender the growth and development of Christianity and the media at local and international levels. That is Lekon Otufodunrin. Then we have Ijoma Onyato, doctor now. She got her doctorate in 2020. She does all that she does, but she also happens to be the head of media at the House on the Rock Church. We have Dr. John Momo, OON. Used to be a news anchor and producer at NTA, now chairman, managing director of Channels TV. He's a staunch Christian. There is no time that John Momo goes to receive a prize of any sort, whether personal recognition or recognition of any of his media products. There is no time that he does not say on stage that this has been possible by the grace of God. We have Motunrayo Alaka. She is the CEO of the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism. And actually, she's a pastor with the Redeemed Church. Very dedicated young woman. Very passionate about ethics, inclusion. She has trained hundreds of journalists. Okay? Theophilus Abba, Punch newspaper. Currently, now he's the editor of the Daily Trust on Sunday, and is a program director, Daily Trust Foundation. All these people, they are all connected to the vine. They are the branches, and they are bearing good fruit. I think we should give them a round of applause. Okay, so where do we go from here? This is where the crinkles, the crankles, and the ziggy-zaggers come in. Next slide, please. Yes, we have televangelism, and we have online evangelism, or shall I call it online evangelism. I understand that it's important for the message to go out. It's important for the gospel to be spread. But we need to ask ourselves some questions. Are they messages? Are they media messages? Are they media moralizing? Are they media mentors? Do we have media managers in the name of senior pastors and bishops, etc.? Is it media madness, or media magic, or media mongering, or media maniacs, or media monsters? I don't know. These are questions that you need to ask yourself. Okay, all I can say is that may he enable us and give us the wisdom to let his power make us perfect in our weakness, so that indeed his grace will be seen to be sufficient for us. Amen. Thank you.
Praise the Lord. Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Somebody wanted to know, but I told the person it's not part of the questions, but have you been able to stay this young? And I said, that is not the reason why we're here today. That's another session entirely. Pastor have not given us date for that one. We'll get back to you. Thank you so much, we're blessed. There's a question. Yes, sir. At the back. We'll take one or two quickly. Please, somebody give him a mic. Come use mine.
Thank you very much, ma'am, and good morning again. I have a few simple questions for you. The first one is about the third point you mentioned, the crisis of conscience. Now, as a Christian journalist, and again, looking at what you have today, where opinion pieces are portrayed as mainstream news, where do you draw the line as a Christian journalist? Can you also put a Christian spin to news, or report news as news? Is it wrong for me to also do the same thing with Christian perspectives to news? That's the first one. The second one, what's going on in the space of advocacy? I noticed there's not a lot of fact-checking going on in places like this. So from what's going on in space, do you know what's going on there? And then the third one, the dangers ahead for today and tomorrow. Sorry, this is particularly now where you're having platform owners curating what's out there. You find if you watch a movie that has Christian content, it is ranked very badly. They would say to you, viewers' discretion is advised. That is one. Somebody Googled and says, what is the example of a madman? And what Google did with its algorithm was that what came up was Donald Trump. So you find that these guys are controlling what is coming out there. How do you fight things like so? Thank you.
Praise the Lord.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think it is important for us to understand that we are in a developing society. And as such, what we as journalists should be doing is providing solutions. There is such a thing as solutions journalism. And so, I can't see anybody. Let me start. There is such a thing as solutions journalism. Thank you. And so I think it's important that when we write, we're not just reporting the facts. We're also proffering or offering solutions. We have gone beyond the point where all we do is report. I think that one of our responsibilities is to also ensure that we educate, that we teach, and that we make suggestions. We're also supposed to let the authorities become interested in what we're talking about. And so by proffering those solutions, we're giving them a way out. We are telling them how to do their job without telling them that they're not doing their job. And that is why we must also be advocates. There is definitely a place for advocacy. Again, because of our developing society, there are many, many people who are voiceless. So we as journalists should be standing in the gap for those people. We have to be advocates. So we have to put ourselves in the position of those who have things to say but are not able to say them. And for me, that is also another responsibility of ours. The third question was to do with unfortunately, the values that we glamorize are not the right ones. It doesn't really matter, or it doesn't seem to matter these days, how people made their money, as long as they've got that money. So until we actually take it upon ourselves to make, okay, let me put it this way. Until we decide that it is sexy to work hard, until we decide that it is important for us to be honest, until we agree that you have to go through a process, you have to be cooked before anybody will eat you. Let me put it like that. I think it was, there's an actor, a black American actor, who says that it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. Denzel Washington. It takes you 20 years to become an overnight success. But what do we see here? We are eulogizing the wrong things and the wrong people. And so we misguide young ones who think that all the glamour that they are seeing on the internet, on Facebook and Instagram, etc., that they think that that is life. It is not. It is fake. To a large extent, it is fake. Somebody has used their imagination to come up with a character. They are not supposed to be actors, but young people don't understand that. So I think we need to pull in the reins and become more responsible people. And and highlights those things, those virtues, those characteristics, those attributes that we used to know as being the right way to live. It's still the right way to live, but it's just not sexy anymore.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.
If I may, I have one question. I know the time is against us, seem to be, but I have a question because, and if I can ask the media to go just one last flip back, I would appreciate and ask if you could just use a brief time to, because I'm more interested in that one slide, and I knew that because of time you moved on very quickly, but when we talk about the last but one slide, where you're talking about Christian media, whether they are Christian Madness or Mongols. I'm personally interested in that. I would love to, just have you say, hear your take on, because there are some of us who are interested in that area, so we don't fall into the madness area. We're going to move to something else.
Yes, I get disturbed sometimes. There are so many churches online. There are many churches that have radio stations, TV stations, etc., etc. I'm not quite sure who controls what is being broadcast. And even if if we're talking about the ones in Nigeria, even if they are under the National Broadcast Commission, is there really anybody in that commission that is in a position to say, this you can show, this you can't show? Because I have been to crusades where miracles happened. I know that miracles happen, okay? But at the same time, there's some abracadabra that you sometimes see, some razzmatazz that you see occasionally on some of these channels and stations, and you wonder, I know that miracles happen, but this one, it gets as it be. So, I'm not sure who is in a position to actually say that this is a miracle and this one is magic. Staged, I'm not sure. As for international stations, well, sometimes you watch, I think on some stations they call them praise-a-thons. Yes. And yes, you watch them and they're raising money. And you ask yourself, are you absolutely sure that this money is going to where it's supposed to go? And they're telling you a variety of different things. And from my own personal experience, I know that I have keyed into some of these. And the results that came out of my keying in, it was nothing short of a miracle. So I am confused at times. Do I follow what is going on? Do I jump on every miracle that is going, for instance, okay? Or are there some that it is really not true? Or do I say to myself, as I have often said to some friends of mine, I'm not interested in what any pastor does with my tithes. All I know is that I must pay them. If he likes, let him jump on helicopter. If he likes, let him buy whatever. It's not my business. My business is to obey. Now, but sometimes when you see the lifestyles of some of our church leaders, I remember years ago watching a program, a documentary. There was this American pastor in a pink suit with a pink Cadillac. And I said, yeah, come on. Tomorrow, will it be a green suit and a green Rolls Royce? But who are we really to take those decisions? But in all honesty, there are lots of things that are happening that I find disturbing. And one of the fallouts or drawbacks of some of these things is that there's a way in which pastors sometimes talk to congregants that makes them feel guilty if they don't do certain things that are expected of them. And when they begin to feel guilty, that is when they begin to lose interest. So one has to know at what point the line is drawn. Give, fine, because we have been told, give and it will be given unto you, blah, 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 blah. But what else is also being given to you from that church congregation or from that church organization? What else do you receive?
Thank you so much.